Candyman. 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 Candyman.
He chose you. He has purpose for you.
Tell everyone. New to the neighborhood.
Hey guys, welcome back to Pop Culture with Pat. So today we are talking about Candyman, one of my most anticipated horror films of the year. Was really looking forward to this one. I actually just saw the original one a couple years ago for the first time, and it instantly became like I think one of my favorite horror movies from like the 90s. So was really looking forward to this. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this thing. So Yahya Abdul-Mateen plays a struggling artist who lives with his girlfriend in the now gentrified Cabrini Greens when one day he stumbles across the legend of Candyman and begins a descent into madness. So two things I want to get, right out of the way to begin things. So one, this film is directed by Nia Dacosta. I am seeing a lot of people, saying that this is Jordan Peele's Candyman. And he is a producer, and I believe he had a writing credit, as part of the script. But he did not direct the film. This is Nia Dacosta's film. See a lot of people, getting that confused, which really sucks because, you want the director, if they do a good job, you want them to get credit, or even if they don't. So yeah, this is actually Nia Dacosta's film. And two, this is a sequel to the original, Candyman. I know there was kind of a lot of talks, is this going to be a remake, or is this, like a reimagining, basically kind of the same thing, or is it a sequel? And yes, this is definitely a sequel to the 1992 Candyman. So I just wanted to kind of, tell you guys those two things. That way you kind of have a better idea of what you're going into when you see this movie. And I don't, as far as it being a sequel to, I don't think you necessarily need to see the original film in order to enjoy this. Yes, obviously you are gonna, I think, enjoy it a little bit more if you have seen that original film, just because they do pay tribute to certain things or follow up on certain aspects. But also, at the same time, I think they do a good job of catching you up, if you didn't see that original film, because they, like I said, they do have aspects from that story in this movie. They talk about it, and if you hadn't seen it, I feel like you kind of, you would get the idea of what's going on. And one of the first things I want to say to, to start off with the positive is just Nia Dacosta, wow, she did an excellent job, directing this film. There is some just really creative, shots throughout the movie, just the cinematography, the lighting, and how everything, is set up all together. I thought it was excellent. Specifically, there is one scene which you guys, it's not really spoilers because it is in the trailer. So there's one specific scene where these girls are in this bathroom. They say, Candyman 5 times. And of course, he shows up and starts, killing them all. So in that scene, you don't really get to see much of, the killings that are actually going on. For the most part, it's, you kind of just rely on the sound design. You hear people getting gutted, it sounds like, and things like that. And the sound design's great in this film as well. But no, for the most part, you don't really see much, except for at one point you see this little handheld mirror drop to the ground, and all that's pretty much relying. You can see the reflection in there, so you can see a little bit of what's going on, but that's it pretty much for the most part. So she kind of, left it up to the viewer's imagination and kind of picture, what is going on. And I thought, and she did that several times throughout the film. So I thought that was a really cool, creative choice. Some of those shots, some of the lighting, particular scenes, there's reds and blues and things like that. And it was just really, well done, overall, as far as the direction goes. And overall, as far as the performances go, as Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, is kind of the lead character in this film, the guy who's the struggling, artist and stumbles across the story of Candyman. I thought he was, he did a good job as far as the leading man goes. And Tiana Paris, which I discovered her from WandaVision, she's in this film, so that that was cool to see her again. And I also think she did a great job. And one of the other characters that kind of is kind of more comic relief, and I can't think of his name right now, but he plays the brother to Tiana Paris's character in the film, and he was kind of there for more comic relief, but he was another interesting character that definitely had some funny moments in the movie. And the last thing that I'll say as far as positives go is that they do something with the Candyman story that I thought was an interesting concept. But I can't really go into too many details because it definitely, you know, has some like spoilers like in it. But I thought that was like an interesting like reimagining, you know, take like on the Candyman lore. All right, guys, now we're going to talk about my negatives with the film. And unfortunately, I was pretty disappointed with this movie because it was something that I wanted to like. And I was actually, like I said, you know, it was one of my most anticipated films of the year. And I'm going to say this right off the bat because I've seen a lot of people, you know, kind of like, you know, saying like, oh, if you don't like this movie, it's because of like all the woke material in it. That is not the case at all. With horror movies, I love when there is a message in them because a lot of times like horror is able to incorporate that, you know, really well. That's not the case at all. My issue is more having to do with like the script, you know, itself and the story. So like I was saying to you guys like earlier, I just actually saw the original film for the first time a couple years ago. You know, that was my first time like watching it. I knew of Candyman, but I just had never sat down and actually watched the film. And I did, you know, watched it for the first time around like Halloween, and I instantly, you know, loved it. It's I would say it's definitely one of my favorite horror films from like the 90s, like overall. I just really liked the, you know, the urban legend aspect to it. I thought that was, you know, really cool. And we had like the, you know, our lead character like Helen, and we're following her, and she's, you know, digging into the lore of Candyman, and just the way, you know, it was like dark and gritty, and I don't know, just everything combined where it did have like, you know, obviously that movie was more than just like your typical horror movie because it did have a message to that film as well. And I thought they did a really good job of, you know, weaving that into the, you know, the story, and it just like altogether just made for a really, really, you know, solid horror film that I think stands out amongst a bunch of the not so great horror films that we did get in like the 90s. And it did so while, you know, being able to, you know, still be like pretty like creepy. It wasn't anything that was like, oh my God, like kept me up like at night, but it definitely had a creepy like aspect. And I know it scared the shit out of a lot of people, you know, growing up like watching it too. And I think part of that might be because of, you know, of Tony Todd, because I mean, the guy, you know, he's a horror icon. He's played a bunch of different characters in horror films. And I think just, you know, whenever he wasn't in the film like a ton, but whenever he showed up, like he just had a really demanding or a commanding, you know, presence to like his character, and you really paid attention to him, and he just had, you know, that voice and everything. So, and I just feel like they didn't really have that with the Candyman this time around. And like I kind of just said like a second ago, that with this, or with the original film, it just had like a darker, grittier vibe to it, I think, like overall. And I don't know if it's just like, sometimes, I don't know, like, guys, am I the only one that like notices this? But like, you know, some of the films like the 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, things like that, they just had kind of that darker, grittier vibe for the most part. And I feel like sometimes now with modern horror films, and this one being like an example, even though like the cinematography and everything like that, there was definitely some really cool shots and the lighting and stuff was done well. But at times, for me, it felt like a little too clean. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, you know, let me know if that makes sense to you guys down below. But it just felt like a little too clean at times. So it didn't have that dark, gritty vibe that I was kind of hoping that it was going to have. There was also some like weird dialogue throughout the film too. Not to the level quite of like old, you know, when I told you guys in that review. But there was some like weird dialogue, and specifically one that comes to my mind is there is a character who is, you know, being killed off, and makes kind of this joke during that scene. So like for me, it just kind of took me really, you know, completely out of that moment. Because I'm like, if you're being chased by this invisible force, whatever, and just like killed someone that, you know, you cared about or whatever, and you're next, you wouldn't say something like that. So that was just like kind of like a really awkward moment to me. And there's just some other things with the story where, like, for example, there was a flashback scene with one of our characters that, you know, goes back to like the 70s, and we see like, you know, this specific moment that's kind of supposed to be like dramatic for the character, and we have it right there, and then I feel like it was never really expanded on or kind of talked about for the most part other than that. So I feel like you could have almost really taken that out of there. Like there is, I guess it does connect in like a small like way, but I don't know, for the most part there was just some moments where like that, where it's like they brought up an idea and then they don't really expand on it, you know, like later on in the film. So that was, you know, that was kind of weird too. And then overall, I just think that the, you know, the ending definitely felt like a little rushed because there's a certain, you know, point where they get to the third act and they're in this, you know, specific place. And all of a sudden it just feel like, and we have this one character who's been a certain way, for most of the film. And then we get to this point and just all of a sudden it has this really dramatic change and kind of goes like batshit crazy. And you're like, where did that come from? Like, am I missing something? So I feel like if they honestly, because it was only like an hour and a half, they probably honestly could have added another 15-20 minutes and kind of maybe explained that a little bit more or hinted at it, and it would have made more sense. So to me, it just felt like a little rushed as far as like that goes. And it just didn't really have that kind of that scary factor to it like the original did. The original didn't like scare me out of my mind, but like I said, there was definitely some parts where it was pretty fucking creepy. And, kids like, wouldn't say Candyman in the mirror 5 times. And I don't know, I just didn't really, there wasn't moments that stood out as much, with the first film as they did with, the sequel or whatever. So just kind of didn't have that same vibe to me like overall. So overall, guys, I think that Candyman had, good intentions and it had some really cool ideas, but unfortunately it just doesn't live up to the original, from 1992. So as far as the score goes, I'm going to give this a 6.5 out of 10. If you're a fan of Candyman, I think it's definitely worth, like checking out at least like once. But it's not something that I think I'm going to end up picking up and, watching like over and over again, like I will do, with the original film. So, but I'm really curious because honestly, I feel like I'm kind of like in the minority. I see a lot of people seem to really, dig this sequel, and I'm glad that you guys do. Trust me, I wished I wanted to enjoy this more than I did. So I want to hear what your guys' thoughts are, overall. Definitely let me know down below in the comments, what did you think of the film? How does it compare to the original? Because, it is a sequel, so we have to talk about, this versus the original film. So I want to hear your thoughts. Definitely let me know. If you guys are new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button as well as the bell button next to it. That way you get notifications for all my new videos. Give this video a thumbs up. And as always, guys, please make sure to check back for more Pop Culture with Pat.